An absolutely beautiful creature. Just look at him. Reaching his little paws up at me like he wants to play. I'm telling you, this is one of my favorite animals on the planet, and I'm probably his favorite human for taking him out here to play on these beautiful plains. He's actually one of the last remaining cats of his particular species, so boy am I glad to have found him and to give him the life that he deserves. Biscuits? Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to talk about a subject that I've been really excited to do a video on: monsters. In D&D, monsters are defined as any creature that can be interacted with and potentially fought and killed. So basically everything that you come across in your Baldur's Gate 3 journey. We're going to focus more so on the obvious threats. We're going to talk about where you might find these monsters, what type of monsters there are, and then understanding their statistics and actions. So you're going to want to stick around to the end of the video for that. If you guys end up enjoying this video, please subscribe, for there will be more Baldur's Gate 3 content on the way. Links to my social medias will be below if you want to stay updated on future new video releases. Let's talk monsters. Monsters can be found virtually anywhere, but the main place we will see them and be challenged by them is in dungeons. Dungeons in Baldur's Gate 3 will likely refer to any enclosed monster-infested location. Considering the name of the game is Baldur's Gate, the city itself will be the host to many of these dungeons. We might enter into a labyrinth sewer system filled with rats, or a temple guarded by an animated construct, or even a thieves' or slavers' den hidden deep below an abandoned building. The Underdark seems like it will be a likely place that we will visit on our journey as well, and this is basically one giant dungeon. You might come across a Mind Flayer prison, or the remains of an ancient tomb where the dead still linger. Adventuring out into the wilderness, we might enter into a swamp-like area filled with bullywugs, or if we're brave enough, we might enter a cave that seems to be the lair of a not-so-friendly creature. Dungeon areas will be everywhere, and they will be filled with monsters of all types. In D&D, monsters are placed in different size categories: tiny, small, medium, large, huge, or gargantuan. There's probably not a need to talk too much about the sizing chart, for monsters in Baldur's Gate 3 we'll actually be able to see with our own eyes, but expect to see monsters that are very small and considered in the tiny category, all the way up to monsters that will take up extremely large spaces, such as a purple worm, which is in the gargantuan category. Size categories also help determine the monster's hit points, which we'll talk about later in the video. So how about a monster's type? A monster's type is important because depending on which category it falls under will determine how certain effects in the game interact with it. Certain spells, magic items, class features, and other effects will sometimes act differently depending on a monster's type. A good example of this is when using an arrow of dragon slaying, it will deal extra damage to dragons specifically, but also to other creatures of the dragon type, such as wyverns. There will likely be 14 different monster types that a monster will fall under. Let's quickly go over them. Aberrations are alien beings that typically have innate magical abilities that draw from the alien creature's mind. Mind Flayers and Beholders fall under this type, and we will likely see both of them in Baldur's Gate 3. Beasts are non-humanoid creatures that are naturally part of the fantasy ecology. Most are unintelligent creatures such as ordinary animals and dinosaurs. Celestials are creatures native to the upper planes, and many of them serve deities. Celestials are good by nature except for the occasional one. Maybe you won't be good by nature, so perhaps they shall be your enemies. Angels are an example of celestial monsters. Constructs are monsters that are made and not born. Some are programmed by their makers, while others are capable of independent thought. Golems are a great example of a construct. Dragons are large reptilian creatures of ancient origin and great power. Many of them are highly intelligent and have innate magic. Creatures distantly related to dragons that are typically less intelligent and powerful may also fall in this category, such as wyverns. Elementals are creatures native to the elemental planes. Genies and invisible stalkers are some examples. Fae are one of my personal favorites, and they are magical creatures closely tied to the forces of nature. They typically dwell in twilight groves and mystical forests. Dryads and pixies are part of the Fae monster type. Fiends, which we just talked about in our Tieflings lore video, are creatures of wickedness, native to the lower planes such as the Nine Hells. Some serve deities while others are controlled by archdevils and demon princes. If you play a warlock, one of your subclass choices is Fiend, which means your patron will be some type of fiend creature. Demons and devils are two very common types of fiends. Giants are what you would expect. Giant human-looking monsters which are many times deformed. Some might even have multiple heads. There are true giants which fall under other subtypes such as frost giants and hill giants, and then there are monsters such as ogres and trolls which are also giants. Humanoids are the main peoples of the D&D world. Humanoids have language and culture and fancy stuff of that sort. Humanoids consist of humans, elves, orcs, goblins, kobolds, etc. Basically, most of the creatures that you come across that retain human-like features and also have language and culture are humanoids. Oozes are gelatinous creatures that rarely have a fixed shape and are mostly subterranean creatures. Black puddings, or is that puddings, and gelatinous cubes are two common examples. Plants are a monster type as well, but we're not referring to your ordinary flora, more so referring to vegetable creatures. Most of these plants can walk and are also carnivores. Treants, gas spores, and myconids are examples of monster plants. And the last monster type, but not least, are the undead. These were once living creatures who are brought to a state of undeath from practices such as necromancy. Vampires, zombies, and ghosts will all fall into this category. So the monsters you come across will fall into one of those types. It's important to have an idea what they might be, for it might influence the actions that you take against them. And if you play as a ranger in Baldur's Gate 3, it may benefit you even more to know the monster's type, for you will likely be choosing a favored enemy or enemies, which is where you will choose a monster type that you want your ranger to be an expert in. It will allow you to study, track, hunt, and even talk to monsters in this specific type better than you would be able to do with other types of monsters. Ranger is considered an underpowered class in D&D, but Larian Studios has already stated they will be making changes to it to make it more balanced. Now let's get into a monster's actual statistics. First, we have to start off with armor class. A monster's armor class will be a number that you'll have to tie or beat with your attack roll to successfully land your strike on them. The armor class does not have anything to do with damage, it's solely dealing with if a strike hits or misses. Let's use a Baldur's Gate 3 specific example to talk about this. In the gameplay here, the character is fighting against monsters called Intellect Devourers. If we refer back to the D&D Monster Manual book, we can see that Intellect Devourers have an armor class of 12. So in the game here, when the character shoots his bow at one of these Intellect Devourers, his attack roll must be equal to or greater than 12 for his shot to hit. As you can see here, he misses, so he must have gotten an 11 or under, so no damage roll will be calculated. Those numbers aren't guaranteed to be in the game, but that's just the gist of it. If a monster does not have any armor, their armor class number will be instead based on their dexterity modifier and natural armor if any. If a monster is actually wearing actual armor or is using a shield, the armor class number will be determined by factoring in the monster's armor, shield, and dexterity modifier. I won't get too much into that stuff, I will do future videos breaking down individual mechanics. Next, we have to take into account monster hit points. If a monster's hit points drop to 0, the monster usually dies or is destroyed. If we look back at our Intellect Devourer, we can see that it has 21 hit points. The way that the game will arrive at this number of 21 is by using the hit dice by size chart for monsters and adding in a monster's constitution modifier. But there's really no reason to get into explaining that, for all you need to know is what is their hit points. The Intellect Devourer has 21 hit points, so to kill one we have to be successful on our attack roll by tying or beating the Intellect Devourer's armor class number, and then the game will instantly do your damage roll, and the results of the damage roll will be subtracted from the 21 hit points. Maybe we can kill it in one turn, or maybe it will take 5. All depends on how your attack and damage rolls go. Keep in mind, guys, that these attack rolls and damage rolls are done instantly behind the scenes when you attack an enemy. You're not actually rolling the dice in combat. Let's look at another monster now, one that I think we just may come across on our journey. One of my subscribers, Angie, will appreciate this one, the Beholder. The Beholder here has an armor class of 18 and has 180 hit points, much more than the Intellect Devourers. Now this doesn't mean that every Intellect Devourer will have 21 hit points or that every Beholder will have 180, because the game can decide to make some of these monsters harder or easier than others. Just like as your character levels up you get more hit points, the same happens with monsters. Next up is a monster's speed. A monster's speed is more so described as how far they can move on their turn in combat. This will be evident when it's their turn and they rush at you. The Intellect Devourer has a speed of 40 feet, which is pretty far, and as you can see in the gameplay they can move pretty far on their turn. Now for the Beholder, you can see that it has a speed of 0 feet. This is because they do not walk, they fly. If a monster does not walk, they will likely either burrow, climb, fly, or swim. Next to the Beholder here, you see in parentheses hover, which is part of the fly category. Having the hover condition will make a monster very hard to knock out of the air. The Beholder's speed is 20 feet flying, so they can only move half as far as the Intellect Devourers on their turn. So depending on how a monster moves, might affect the outcome of certain actions you take on them as well. Next up is monster ability scores. Just like your character, monsters will have 6 ability scores and corresponding modifiers. Fast monsters will have high dexterity, smart monsters have high intelligence, strong monsters will have higher strength, etc. We can't forget saving throws. Many monsters will not have any saving throw proficiency, but there are some that do. Saving throws are reserved for creatures that are adept at resisting certain kinds of effects. A creature that isn't easily frightened or charmed might gain a bonus on its wisdom saving throws, such as the Beholder. The Beholder has a +8 to intellect, +7 to wisdom, and a +8 to charisma in the saving throw category. This is good to know, for trying to put a magical effect on a Beholder might prove extremely difficult. The Intellect Devourer, like many other monsters as you can see, does not have any saving throw proficiency. Monster skills. Some monsters might actually have skill proficiencies, kind of like your character does. Monsters that are very perceptive and or stealthy might gain a bonus in wisdom perception checks and dexterity stealth checks. If we look at the Chimera here, we can see that it has perception +8 under skills. So if you try to sneak past a Chimera and you have to do a stealth check to see if it spots you, you have to overcome that extra +8 on top of a monster's passive perception score. It's also important to note that some monsters might have resistance to certain things, some might have vulnerabilities, and some might even be immune to certain conditions. When fighting or before combat, all of these will be important to at least try to figure out, for it will have a great effect on how you go about attacking a monster. The next category is monster senses. The senses category will note a monster's passive perception score, as well as any special senses a monster might have. Special senses can consist of blind sight, which allows a monster to perceive its surroundings without relying on sight, dark vision, which allows a monster to see better in the dark, tremor sense, which allows a monster to detect vibrations, and true sight, which allows a monster to see things such as invisible creatures and magical illusions. Some monsters will know one or many different languages. If we look at the Banshee here, it can speak Common and Elvish, while the Basilisk next to it does not know any languages. Languages will probably come into play in the game, so you'll likely need to know certain languages to be able to do different things, such as talking to specific creatures. Now let's talk about a monster's challenge rating. A challenge rating tells you how great a threat the monster is, as well as how many experience points you will be awarded from killing it. A monster's challenge rating is an indicator of how hard it will be for you and your party to defeat it. If you are in a party of level 2 characters, coming across a monster with a challenge rating of 2 will mean that it will be an average challenge for you. Monsters with under a 1 challenge rating are weaker than first level characters, and monsters with a 0 rating are basically insignificant unless in large numbers. Considering max level in Baldur's Gate 3 will be level 10, any monster with a 10 or higher will be designed to truly test a party's skills. If they make Baldur's Gate 4 and we can get to level 20 with our characters, we will likely end up fighting monsters in the 21 to 30 challenge rating. As you can see, the experience that you are awarded upon killing a monster goes up as the monster challenge rating goes up. The last 2 things I want to talk about in this video are a monster's special traits and their actions. A monster's special traits are characteristics that are likely to be relevant in combat that require some explanation. Not all monsters will have special traits. These are unique characteristics, such as a monster having psionics or innate spellcasting, which allows monsters to cast certain spells without needing certain components. If we look at the purple worm here, we can see that it has a special trait called Tunneler, which allows the worm to burrow through solid rock at half its burrow speed. And then the Quaggoth has Wounded Fury, which gives it advantage on attack rolls when it reaches 10 hit points or fewer. All these traits are good things to know about a monster you are fighting. Then we have a monster's actions. These are its attacks. On a monster's turn in combat, they will use up their action point by doing one of their actions. The werewolf here has special traits of shape changer and it has keen hearing and smell, but for its action it has bite, which is considered as a melee weapon attack. It has claws, which is also a melee weapon attack, and then it has spear, which is a melee or ranged attack. The damage that these attacks can do is shown as well as their range. Above bite, claw, and spear, you can see that it also has multi-attack, which allows the werewolf to make 2 attacks, one with bite and one with claw or spear. The monster's actions are the main attacks that they'll be doing against you on their turn. Now, some monsters will actually be legendary creatures, which will allow them to take a certain number of legendary actions outside of its turn. This is where fights can get really interesting. We'll talk about legendary creatures in another video. So I hope that gives you guys a decent overview of what to expect with monsters in Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of this video is more so explaining how Larian Studios will be creating these monsters. You don't necessarily need to know everything, but at least you know what you might be up against now. My voice is a little bit off for this video, guys, so I apologize for that. But if you guys enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It's a huge help to my videos. I do all sorts of content on this channel, ranging from comedy videos to live streams to game reviews to product reviews, etc. I would love to see some of you guys on a future video. More Baldur's Gate 3 videos on the way. Until next time.